Anyone who's ever worked knows that at some point a job can get stressful, but most of us get through it and live to fight another day. The Big Think tells us, echoing a study from the University of Manchester in England, if you work in a low-paying job you hate, you are likely to be more chronically stressed out than if you were just unemployed. In that case, it's not only the job that causes mental stress, but the fact it pays little money. It might be worse at the bottom of the pay scale when you're being screamed at all day, but also desperately need the job. But those at the top of the food chain have their own stresses, and some other jobs just offer very challenging experiences. We'll look at the worst in this episode of the Infographics Show, jobs that literally make you kill yourself. Before we start, we should tell you that we are of course talking about jobs with the highest suicide rates. These rates might change year to year, and statistics will change from source to source, and which country those sources come from. That said, there can be no doubt the following occupations see many people taking their own lives. Construction worker. In the UK at least, we're told that for men, low-paid construction work has the highest suicide rate. The Office of National Statistics reported that men doing this job are 3 times more likely to take their own life than the average UK citizen. In 2015, the people in this job represented 17% of all suicides in the country. The US report from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention also said something similar, stating that low-paid manual laborers who face uncertain employment and typically work on their own are prone to committing suicide. Farmers. In many reports we found, farmers were taking their lives at a rate higher than people in other professions. This also fell to low-skilled agricultural work in some reports. But it's not just the laborers. The Farm Society Foundation, which was created to focus on the mental health of farmers in the UK, said that if you harvest crops or rear animals, you are in a high suicide bracket for farming. It said that changing markets, disease of livestock, failing crops, and even Brexit was taking its toll on farmers. The charity also added, in an industry with the poorest safety record of any occupation in the UK, stress is often a key factor in many of the accidents, injuries, and illnesses taking place on farms. The CDC, in one US report, albeit a few years old, said that agricultural workers, farmers, fishermen, lumberjacks had a suicide rate of a staggering 85 per 100,000. This is compared to the average rate of 21.3. Factory work. A lot of mind-numbing work we may have done in the past is now automated. Imagine standing on a conveyor belt production line for 8 hours or more. The UK Office of National Statistics calls this work process plant occupations, but that could mean many jobs. Still, if your job falls into that category, you have much more chance of committing suicide than the average UK citizen. The CDC puts production and factory workers high too, with a suicide rate of 35 per 100,000. We might remember those stories a few years ago about suicide nets being installed at Foxconn in China, where iPhone components were made and the phones were put together. The Guardian reported worker after worker threw themselves off the towering dorm buildings, sometimes in broad daylight in tragic displays of desperation and in protest at the work conditions inside. It said in 1 year at one plant, 14 people died from jumping and 20 others had to be talked down. Police officers. A career website tells us that many cops kill themselves due to job stress. This comes from a 2018 article in Men's Health. It wrote that according to a 2018 study from the Ruderman Family Foundation, the number of cops that killed themselves when the data was compiled was 3 times more than those killed in the line of duty. According to the article, cops killing themselves is just getting worse in the USA. Long hours, daily stress dealing with danger, and the tough guys don't like to talk about the stress apparently. The article said this about stressed and depressed cops. Many are haunted by the pervasive fear that undergoing treatment will have professional repercussions, such as them being passed over for promotions or removed from patrol work on the street. One cop called Al Hernandez said that over his 35-year career at the Fresno Police Department in California, 14 of his colleagues had taken their lives, but that rate seemed high compared with other reports. A police website we found does say the rate is too high, but 2016 was a good year, as that year just a few more men died in the line of duty than killed themselves. Still, police life might not exactly portray lethal weapon, as other jobs can be much more stressful. The CDC says people in the category of firefighters, police, correction workers, and others in protective services have a suicide rate of 31 per 100,000. Bankers. Why are so many bankers killing themselves? Asked the New York Post. The CDC says stockbrokers are also killing themselves at an unusually high rate. There are many reports about this, from Hong Kong to New York to London. An investment banker at JP Morgan jumped to his death from the roof of the bank's headquarters in Central yesterday, wrote a Hong Kong newspaper. Deutsche Bank executive Brooke Smith was found dead in his South Kensington home after police responded to reports of a man found hanging at his house, wrote the UK media in 2014. He had hanged himself in an apartment that cost $4.5 million in 2000. It's hard right at the top, too. In 2016, Martin Senn, the former chief executive of Zurich Insurance, took his own life after a takeover bid didn't work out and the company saw some heavy losses. Soldiers. We all handle stress differently, but witnessing the ravages of war doesn't sit well with even the toughest or most impressive of us. In fact, the stats are very disturbing if you believe the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. It said in 2016, 20 veterans killed themselves every day. This was 18% of suicides in the USA, but military vets only make up 8% of the population. This is much higher than the average in the USA, and while most of the jobs we've discussed up until now were filled by males, women in the military kill themselves at a high rate too. According to one academic research paper we found, the rate has climbed much higher since 2005. US Veterans Magazine backs that up, stating there's clearly a serious issue with suicides among active duty military service members, veterans, and their families, and it's one that we are passionate about addressing. This was a quote in the article from a charity that helped US veterans. Creatives. The CDC put many jobs in one category, those of artists, designers, entertainers, athletes, and media. Well, we all know about the tormented artist, and so many of them either doing what Kurt Cobain did or virtually drinking themselves to death like Amy Winehouse. According to statistics, if you're in this line of work, you are much more likely to commit suicide. The Telegraph tells us that tortured geniuses have a much higher chance of killing themselves than the average dullard. Whether it's Hunter S. Thompson with a .45 caliber handgun or Virginia Woolf walking into a river with stones in her pockets, it seems that having natural intelligence and hypersensitivity can be a hard thing. Woolf wrote in her suicide note, "I begin to hear voices and I can't concentrate, so I'm doing what seems to be the best thing to do." But it's in the statistics too, with one report telling us, for the first time, reliable data has shown that the suicide rate among people working in the creative roles is significantly higher than the national average. Care workers. This is high for both men and women, with UK statistics telling us care workers are twice as likely to kill themselves as the average person working in the country. It depends what kind of care, but reports state that in the UK, many people such as physicians simply burn out from the number of hours they work. The Lancet tells us the rate of depressive disorders among healthcare workers compared with the general population is alarming. It's the same in the US according to The Hill. One article opens with, "As America focuses on one epidemic, the opioid crisis, another goes entirely ignored." That's the mental health of care workers. The article was written by a healthcare worker in 2018. Amazingly, she wrote, "I have lost 6 colleagues to suicide, 5 physicians and 1 physician assistant." She wrote that those hardly in the game, the junior doctors, were depressed and suicide risks. She also said that while the police and military are now realizing suicide is a big problem, strategies need to be developed to protect healthcare workers.